The journey we're taking is the journey within you. Everybody has their own story and their own journey to share. Every journey conceals another journey within its lines, the path not taken and the forgotten angle. Listen to the stories from others sharing their triumphs and struggles that led them to where they are today. Welcome to the journey within you. Today, I have the pleasure of having someone I actually don't really know, but because of our internet and being able to connect with people on Facebook, there's a group for podcasters, and I just put something out there. We were allowed to do that, and then people can either be a guest or ask you to be a guest. And so Deanna was really, reached out and said, I would like to be a guest on your podcast if we found that we fit and it aligned with your podcast. So today I have Deanna to come in and share her. She has a health journey that I want her to talk about a little bit about. And Deanna, welcome today.
Thank you so much for having me, Laura. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So if you would, Deanna, just take us back a little bit about, where you're from, a little bit about your family, and then just lead us into a little bit about that health journey.
Sure. So I was born in Connecticut, so I'm a good New England girl. Although I currently live in North Carolina, where I've lived most of my life in North Carolina.
Okay.
In the Raleigh area. But I grew up most of my life as as an only child, and in a very rural area. So I had a lot of fun, like when other kids were playing like maybe dolls or wanting to be firemen or whatever, I was out playing scientist. So,
Yeah.
I wanted to be an archaeologist, and I really wanted to read like Jacques Cousteau at one point
fun.
and all that stuff. So, I finished high school in Connecticut and then ended up in college in Florida.
Oh.
And that's where I became a chemistry major. Although, to be fair, that wasn't what I had started as. The reason I was in Florida was I wanted to be a marine science major.
Oh, wow.
And the college that I went to offered that degree, but it was very smart. It said, if you are going to be a marine science major, you must double major in something else.
Ooh.
Because they wanted to make sure that you had something else besides just marine science too.
Mm-hmm.
Now, marine science is a little bit more important now, but at the time there wasn't a whole lot of jobs or anything, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I chose marine science chemistry and ended up and took almost all the classes until I've always been claustrophobic as a kid, and I didn't even think about how that would translate to being underwater.
Exactly.
Right? Because in an ocean, I always loved to swim. I had never thought about it before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's like this, and it's a vast area. I was about closed spaces.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, it's about breathing.
Yes. Yes, majorly underwater.
Right. Oh. And so snorkeling was fine, but the prospect of, everybody else could snorkel and go down under the water and then come
Not
and
me.
spit. I can't do that.
No,
and
me
so
either.
and so unfortunately what happened is that I did all marine science classes except for the couple that I needed diving certification for. So that meant I couldn't do marine science major, and I ended up in chemistry.
Wow.
Which ended up, I remember my chemistry professor telling me, oh, you should go to graduate school. And I was like, are you kidding me?
Wow.
But I did. And I ended up in graduate school at Duke in North Carolina. And I ended up with a master's degree from there. And so I moved around a little bit after that, but ultimately I ended up in a pharmaceutical company in North Carolina. I spent a couple years with one in New Jersey as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Before I spent most of my time down here in North Carolina in pharmaceutical research. So I was working on, my whole role was to find new drugs for people, right? Which I loved. The prospect of being able to help somebody and understand how the body works. All those things is kind of like, this is another way to help people besides being a doctor or a nurse. It was a way to, help solve diseases or whatever, various different things. So I did that for a couple of decades.
So when you were working in that field, you knew, like when you got a drug, you knew every component of that drug and what that component did for the body.
Yeah. So I was at the end of research that was just in the very beginning. So we were in the discovery part. So in
Oh,
order
okay.
to be able to work on discovering the new drug, we had to understand, okay, so basically what you're doing is looking in the body for particular kind of receptors or places where naturally things happen. So if there's like a specific trigger point or something for a particular way of doing, like eating or disease or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we would look for that and understand how does it work? And then we'd say, okay, if it works this way, then we either need to do something that blocks it so it can't do it anymore, or we need to do something that encourages it to do it. And so
Mm-hmm.
then that's what we would do. So you had to kind of understand a little bit about the mechanism before you ever started working on it. And then after
Ah,
that, and usually what that meant was you'd take the natural piece of thing, whatever it was, the natural thing that caused whatever the response was, and then you would try and adapt it with a man-made one.
okay. So
Essentially,
how long were you like on a project? I mean, I guess it would be called a project, or would it be?
yeah. It
Yeah.
oh yeah, absolutely. It depends. I was on a lot of different projects,
Okay.
right? A lot of different
Yeah. I
projects
didn't
at
know
a
if they would
different.
like take years sometimes, or maybe
Oh,
it was
absolutely.
okay. Yeah.
So, but a lot of times as the research chemist part of it, you may only be on it for several years because
Yeah.
then it would go to the next group of people, right? The
Okay.
clinical people who would start really once you kind of got something that you thought was going to be a drug, then they
Mm-hmm.
took it from there. They did the
Mm-hmm.
more extensive research that needed. But I was on the part of let's find it first. Let's
Let's
find these
find it.
things.
Yeah.
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 So I got to be on a whole variety of different projects. And a lot of times what happens is you are on a kind of area or a disease area. So
Right.
it might be mental health, it might be cardiovascular, it might be airway stuff, it could
Mm-hmm.
be
Mm-hmm.
weight loss, it can be
Mm-hmm.
any of those kind of things.
Right. So you'd focus in that one area and then
Yeah,
go from there.
usually.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you build up and get a bit of specialty in that area because
Mm-hmm.
they're very similar, right? That's what happens is
Right.
they have kind of similar things, and so it help you bring expertise to those areas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And so you were working, and then how long you retired, or something happened, or?
So, um, what? Well, first of all, it's a kind of pharmaceutical is a kind of stressful job, which I did
Mm,
notice.
very. I can imagine.
um, and in it, honestly, I suppose it's not that much different than a lot of corporate jobs, right? They
Right.
all have their levels.
How
It's
many
not
hours were
specific.
you working a week?
Certainly 40, but it could be anywhere to 50 or more. It depends. Toward the end, I taught a lot of clinical software for doing clinical trials.
Mm,
And so I was teaching to the Far East. So that meant that I might be teaching at,
at
midnight,
crazy
1 or 2 in the
hours.
morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. To be
Yeah.
able to teach them and stuff like that. So it got a little
Mm,
crazy. What ended up happening for me with most of the people I was with is our whole department, they downsized our department, which was
mm,
about 200 people or more.
wow.
And so because of that, that meant that I was not going to find a job back in the company. And so then I had to decide what is it that I wanted to do.
Mm,
Um, and that's what happened. I sat down and the really good thing I did, and I entirely encourage this for anybody who might find themselves in this situation, and they have the ability to do this. Um, I had been working, honestly, I have been working since I was 14, right?
yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
remember a time when I wasn't working,
Right.
part-time or whatever, but I've always worked, right? And
Yeah.
so I had spent a couple decades in this high kind of pressure, which I like, but there are
Mm-hmm.
parts I didn't like. Some I
Of
did, some I
course.
didn't,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
I was kind of like, wait a minute, you need to decompress. Do not be running off and making decisions
Mm-hmm.
until you've decompressed, because it is so easy to run right back to what you just came from, which
Right.
isn't necessarily a bad thing, but make sure you know that's what you really want,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Not just because it's what you know.
Yeah.
So I gave myself 90 days because we had been given a severance package,
Mm-hmm.
that in it we had, as part of that, we had a thing where we could get help to
Oh,
find a
good.
job,
Yeah.
right? And but you had to register for it. You had to start it within 90 days.
Yeah.
So I gave myself right up until the deadline. They kept going, "Aren't you gonna?" I'm like, "I'm not,"
I'm
because
gonna know. Yeah.
exactly. I wanted to make sure that I could just relax for a little bit. My whole body
Right.
needed to calm down, right? Because I was so,
Exactly.
that had been such a rigmarole. So I did that. And once I did that, I finally realized that, there were times when I was looking at jobs and I was like, oh, I could easily do that. I was already doing that job. I could do
Mm-hmm.
it. And then I would go to submit the resume, and I would just be like, I couldn't bring myself to do it. Right. You know what I'm
Ooh,
saying?
you
I
wouldn't
was
hit
like,
click.
I
Yeah.
was like, no, because what, because honestly, I was looking at it like, oh God, if you get that, then you're going to have to do it. So,
You're going to have to actually do it
yeah. And so then I
and be
looked
committed.
more, yep,
Yeah.
I looked more into for my own business. And it was that I was already doing Reiki. I was already doing energy
Mm-hmm.
healing. And
Mm-hmm.
so I thought, well, that's another healing form, right? That's
Right.
another way of doing this.
Right.
And so
Mm-hmm.
let's look into that. And so that's what I spent time doing. But that first year was really about decompressing, right?
Yeah.
All that
Yeah.
stress, and my
Well, your
body.
body is so used to doing the same thing, same thing, same thing. And then
Yep.
all of a sudden, whoop, you got to
Yep.
change pattern here and change pivot.
And
Pivot's the word I've used this year.
absolutely. And one of the things that we know from what that I learned from doing research is that so many important systems in your body have compensatory mechanisms, right? In other words, that means that it's not just one way that something happens, because your body wants to survive, right?
Right.
So it
Right.
always has a back
In
door
survival
to
mode.
try and, right, for the important things, it always has a back door, right? So in my case, if I wasn't doing things particularly healthy in that lifestyle I was living, it was doing whatever it could on the back end to keep me
Mm-hmm.
going,
To keep you
right?
going.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't really notice, because for me, it was like, oh yeah, I'm a little tired, on whatever things were.
Yeah. We
You just
excuse it
keep going.
away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so because I was still functioning, okay, fine.
Mm-hmm.
And so then during that year, I kind of I had slowed way down, because not only that, I was meditating more, right? I wasn't in that stressed out position.
Mm.
I wasn't having that constant, yeah, any of that constant stress, and my body was trying to come into an equilibrium. It was
Mm-hmm.
going through a whole bunch of equilibriums, because it was going through hormonal changes. It was
Oh,
it was
yeah.
just it was going through
Yeah.
everything. Um, and it wasn't too long after that one weekend I had just been outside, as I am known to do, and certainly back then I had spent the entire weekend doing yard work and
Playing in the yard. Yeah.
planting all the flowers and stuff for the spring, because
Yeah.
here it gets pretty hot pretty quick. So if you got a
Mm-hmm.
cool day, it's like, get out there
You get
while you
out
can.
there. Yeah.
So I had been in the sun. I was a little sunburnt. I certainly had pulled a lot of muscles, right? Because that's
Mm-hmm.
what I did. And I was taking some Advil, and I was doing all these things. And I didn't really think anything of it. And I went to sleep on I don't know if it was Sunday night or Monday night now. And when I turned out the light, and I laid down, I had problems breathing.
Mm.
And I thought it was asthma. At first, I was like, this is weird,
All the
because
weeds, everything. Yeah.
yeah, because I was like, I mean, I could breathe. I mean, the motion was there,
Mm-hmm.
but I was, if you call it kind of oxygen starvation, right? When you're not,
Right. Right.
when you're
You don't feel like
oxygen
you're getting a
starved.
full load of your oxygen.
And I
Yeah.
was like, okay, what's this about? And like, I do have some allergies. And so I thought, okay, I mean, it's not unheard of that you can have adult onset asthma. It could be,
Mm-hmm.
but that's interesting. So I got up, and I still was trying to do stuff. And I had a little bit of some asthma medicine that I had been given for a cold, like a while back.
Yeah. So we
And I,
doctor ourselves.
yep. And I tried a little bit of that, and it helped a little, but I realized this has been getting better. And it was the middle of the night, and I was like, so I told my husband, but I was kind of scared, because I woke him up from deep sleep. And so I really was like, I don't really want him driving me to the ER when he's half asleep. He'll be like,
Yeah.
right. So we ended up calling the ambulance.
Did you?
Um, and during that time, my blood pressure was really high.
Mm.
Eventually, I was starting to breathe. I had calmed down a bit. I was having,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was still, but it wasn't as bad as it had been.
Right.
They got me in the back of the ambulance. They gave me some breathing treatments, which did help quite a bit. They didn't leave right away, which I didn't really notice. My husband told me later they didn't. And I talked to some folks that are friends that know paramedics and stuff like that. And they say when they don't leave right away, when they put you in the back, because they don't think you're stable.
So they don't want to move you.
They don't want to move
yeah,
you if they're
yeah,
not stable. And
right.
so I remember saying to them at one point, I was just kind of dozing and I'm like, okay, breathe. I was so tired. And then finally I kind of went, can we just, because I kept waiting for them to go, right? And I'm like, can we just go already? Because if we don't go, I really have to go to the bathroom. So either I want to get up and go back in the house and go to the bathroom, or can we get there already? And so she looked at me kind of funny. She's like, okay, all right, okay. And then they finally went. And so, but I didn't realize how much time had passed. As it turned out, so the diagnosis in the end, as we come all to this end of this thing, was heart failure. And at that point, they considered it congestive heart failure because they did see some fluid around
your heart,
on my heart and lung area. Not a lot, but enough. Which totally boggled my mind.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
It had no,
like, where did that come out of?
Exactly. And as anybody who gets that kind of a diagnosis, I was scared to death. The doctor, I finally saw a cardiologist about 24 hours later or more. I saw other doctors, like ER doctors, and they were trying to stabilize and things like that. But I finally saw a cardiologist who had apparently looked at my test, all the various things. And at that point, he had come into me and said, and I remember this, I'm sure he said other things too, but you remember the part that most bothers you.
Yeah.
He said to me, what did he say? He said, well, that's it then. You've really you've done it to your heart. Like, there's no cure for what you've got. The only cure for you is a heart transplant. And I was just like, so I went from I'm breathing fine to you need a heart transplant.
You need a heart transplant.
Now, that's not what he said. He didn't say you need a heart transplant, but he said the only cure is a heart transplant, which is true. If you damage, I mean, that is a true statement.
Right.
But in my scared mentality,
you're thinking, it's like, I got to do this or I'm going to die. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm like, wait a minute. I went from this to a heart transplant? Are you, what is just happened?
Yeah.
Honestly, I think a bit of it was, I don't know. I don't know how many patients they see. I felt like it was a little bit like it was a scare tactic almost. Like you will do the things. Now, of course, he doesn't know anything about me. So he doesn't know I'm a scientist. He doesn't know I work in pharma. He doesn't know that, I'm already on board with stuff. You don't have to scare me to death about it. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And so, if you tell me to do this, I'm going to do it. Right. As opposed to, so he might have people that, anyway, whatever it was, it got me going. And they put me on 3 standard drugs that they do, what they would call a cocktail.
For this type of diagnosis.
For heart failure. And so I went home with that cocktail. And, I felt pretty good. I mean, honestly, I felt pretty good. The interesting thing was, of course, and I can't remember if it was right then they told, before I left the hospital or shortly thereafter, they asked me the things I was taking. One of them was thyroid medicine, which they switched my thyroid medicine on me, which didn't help.
That messes you up so bad when they do that.
Yep. And then just made up a dose to kind of make up for the, I'm like, you can't, anyway. They also told me at that time, I already took supplements, and these are some supplements that I had been taking for decades, well, at least a decade or more. And they're just kind of things, simple things, right? They weren't, they're not, but I had, because I'd been did a doctor program before, and it was kind of like, these are good things for the heart, etc. Okay. So they told me to stop taking everything. Like, do not take any. And so it's like, oh gosh, maybe that, so you freak out and go, okay.
Yeah.
And so I stopped doing that and I took the drugs. And I was able to go out and, I mean, I was a little scared about things, but I was able to get out and do stuff. I mean, it wasn't really that big of a problem. I drove myself I'm in Raleigh. I drove myself to Virginia Beach for a week-long retreat. It's like, okay.
You did good. Yeah.
Right. And it wasn't that long after I came back that I started to have some issues. And the first issue I had was I started to have, it's really hard to describe. I call it like a seizure, although in medical terms, they wouldn't call it a seizure. To me, it feels like a seizure because what happens is your muscles freeze.
Yeah.
Like everything freezes and you can't move it even if you wanted to.
Oh,
So for me, that sounds like a seizure. Now, it's not the seizures that we think of where you lose
where you're
consciousness,
choking. Yeah.
right, or any of that stuff. But my muscles would seize and I couldn't do anything. And it started a little bit and it freaked me out. And it was when I was with a friend at dinner one night. She came over and we went to dinner and she's like, I'm a little scared. So she's like, took me to the hospital. And of course, it didn't happen again. So we didn't think about it. They couldn't find anything, et cetera, et cetera. But then what happened is over the course of the following weeks and months, it became fairly
More
common.
frequent.
Every morning, certainly every morning it would happen. Sometimes it would happen, and it started with my legs, so I couldn't move, I couldn't walk or do anything. I had to wait for a little while. Then eventually it moved to my arms and
that is so weird.
My torso. And I kept getting sicker and sicker and sicker. I went for a variety of things happened during that time. I was in the ER every 3 weeks. It felt like, but something going, something was wrong.
Test after test after test.
Yeah. And some of them were pretty invasive and, it's like, cause they wouldn't believe me. Cause I'm like, something's wrong with the drug. Nope. And so, we got to the point where, it started to work on my throat. The muscles in my throat started seizing.
Scary.
And my diaphragm muscle seized.
No.
So for me, that I couldn't breathe. So I couldn't get my lungs to move. I could not breathe. And my throat would clog. I mean, I couldn't. And I was like, okay, I put up with this with the legs. I put up with it with the arms, even though I made it so. Oh, and in this time, I was so feeble at this point that I had gone from just several weeks ago from being able to drive myself and unload the car, and blah, 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 to have my husband with me in the bathroom when I showered because I couldn't do it by myself. I was too young for this. Right?
Yeah.
I'm like, I was like, what, how did this happen? I went from, I can't even lift my arm over my head, barely to shampoo long enough to shampoo my hair. To where I started when I was so sick, I wasn't this bad.
Right.
So I spent a lot of time researching stuff because I couldn't do anything else.
Right. So why not?
Yep. I was stuck on the couch. Really. That's all I could do for all that time. And so I did a lot of research, and because I know some of the, because of the background I had, I started looking at some of the drugs and like, okay, what does this do? Where does it come from? What's going on? What are the possibilities? What are the side effects? Where can I find more side effects? Like I went into the FDA database and looked at it as opposed to just
just simple Google look. Yeah.
Because all the doctors kept telling me it's impossible. I've 30 years I've done this and nobody's ever had that symptom and blah, 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 on and on and on and on. Nobody would listen. And so, I do after all that time, even when I had started having a seizure in front of the doctor, they still didn't believe.
Still didn't want to take it. Yeah.
Like, I guess they thought I was play acting. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I remember one day in July, when I just remember it was in the summer anyway, that it was so hot and it was like going to be 104 that day. Right.
Oh my goodness.
And so, and so I was in the air conditioning, but I was freezing. I was under a blanket and the air conditioning wasn't on that high, but my body had so deteriorated.
Just so changed. Yeah.
I had to bring a thick blanket with me to the doctor's office. I was freezing everywhere I went because my body had so deteriorated. And so I remember laying there and saying to myself, okay, so let's look at this. Let's have you and me have this moment.
Yeah.
Right. So the doctors literally told me, if you stop taking these drugs, you will die. That's what they told me.
Try to scare you.
And they kept telling me over and over and over again, you're going to die if you don't take these. And so I sat there with this for a moment, sat there with, kind of prayer and divinity and kind of tuning in and just kind of going, okay, so here's the option. I can continue to take these drugs and we see what we're doing right here. This is
you're dying.
Is this how, even if you just would, this is what it is.
But just exist on a couch. No.
Is you going to do this for the next decade or more of your life? Because you might, you're young enough that you could be here another decade just laying here on the couch. What does that do to your husband? What does that do to your family? What does that do to you? I mean, this is no existence. We can do this, or you can, if you really believe and you look like you feel like you have something, that there's something here, then you can wean yourself off the drugs and see. And understand that, well, if you don't take, they kept telling you don't take the drugs, you're going to die.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, okay, so are you okay with that? If that is what happens, are you going to be okay with that? And that's when you have to have your own personal moment of,
Yeah.
you know, yeah, I'm okay. I mean, I know what my life is like. I know,
You definitely don't want to live like that.
no, and I know, you know, I know that there's a beautiful world past here, right? And so, you know, yes, it's not, I'm not trying to be dead, but I also
Right.
know that
This isn't how you want to live.
if this is the time when I'm supposed to leave, then it's the time I'm supposed to leave. And so, so the thing was, so I can come off these and live and live the best life that I can at the time.
Yeah.
Right. And so I can enjoy whatever. It may only be a year, it may be 6 months, it may be whatever, but I won't be stuck on this couch.
Right.
I will actually be able to do some kind of living for the whatever time I have left.
Right.
And at that time, even with the medicine, the general prognosis was about 5 years. Now, for anybody who's familiar with heart failure, there's a heart failure scale. It goes from 1 to 4. 1 is where you have some physical abnormality. And then 4 is when it's a heart transplant is needed.
Yeah.
It's like you can't do anything and you are waiting for transplant, essentially. And when I finally got to a very specific heart failure doctor, he gave me my ranking, which was a 2B, which meant that I had significant issues. And when I saw him, my husband had to wheel me in a wheelchair. I could not walk that far. I could not. My legs were with the muscle; they were just shot. And so, yeah. So then I just weaned myself off the drugs. It's really funny because I weaned myself off the one I thought was the issue first,
and it wasn't.
And
Nothing changed.
It got a little better,
right,
but not much.
Right.
And it wasn't until I took the last one, which was only a half of a pill, which was a small little half a pill.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I took that away that within days they stopped, and I've never had them again unless they try to put me back on the drugs. And then I would start to, and I'll go a little ways, and then it'll
start again.
Yeah. And so, you know, I understood what was going on. I remember going to the doctor. I'm like, do you understand that you just gave me 2 drugs in the same pathway? And they looked at me like, pathway? What? You know, it's like, as a scientist, I know, right?
You know,
it's like, you know, there's this pathway of this triggers this, triggers this, triggers this. And you just gave me 2 drugs and the same thing, squashing the same. So it's like double whammy. And to be fair, they never asked me how I got to where I was or how I understood any of what happened to how I got anywhere.
Right.
And they just gave me the traditional cocktail that has been done for decades.
For years. Yeah.
That was tested on men.
Yep.
So yeah, so that's what happened. And to be fair, it took me a long time to recover from what they did.
I can imagine, because you got to get all that out of your system.
Yeah. So there's a what's it called? Rabidilum. I can't even say it. Anyway, it's essentially like muscle wasting.
Right.
And so that's kind of what I had. I mean, in a way, I mean, my muscle, I couldn't do things. So for a long time, even after I stopped the drugs, I mean, I got some of stuff back, but I couldn't drive myself to the store. When we went to the grocery store, you know, I took the little cart, right? Because I didn't have the strength to walk. I mean, I could do a little bit, but I didn't have the strength to walk through the whole thing and then get in the car and drive home. It's like I could do one or the other, not both.
What year was all this?
So that happened in 2017. It was like April of 2017 when I went into the ER. And so by the time I stopped the drugs, it was August or September of that year. I mean, it didn't take
long for you to get everything realizing. Yeah.
But what ended up happening is I had so messed up my body that my adrenals tanked.
Yeah.
And so I had an adrenal doctor start helping me, and he started helping me get back on some nutrients into my body, and my body rebelled.
Was lacking all that, yeah.
Yeah, it rebelled terribly because it couldn't handle anything. Even
Right.
small doses of anything it just couldn't take it. Yeah, I was off. Was off my thyroid meds at that time. I mean, I had to take, I was off everything. I couldn't take any vitamins or anything because, and then my vitamin D tanked.
Nothing could it couldn't process.
Yeah, and they told me to stop taking it. I have vitamin D deficiency and I needed the vitamin D, but they had told me to stop taking everything. It was quite a mess. It really was. So it took me a while. I went to a naturopathic doctor for a little while, which gave me a little bit of feeling a little bit more confident in my body, right? A little bit. I didn't get as much out of it as other folks might hope, but I did. It got me going. And then it got me doing some more and looking some more and going, I need to find out about adrenal stuff. And then I worked with that person for a while, for several months, and finally got a little bit better. By 2019, I started being a little bit better. 2018, 2019, I started doing a little better. And then I just kind of started taking the supplements.
Yeah, go back to your supplements.
The things that I had always done before. I mean, these weren't bad for me.
Right.
And with time, I started to feel better. Of course, I was following the diets they gave me, which was the worst thing for me. That also messed with all of the things in my body. And I gained weight because of the drugs they put. I mean, it was just a big mess. I even had to go on an anti-anxiety drug for that first year because I was afraid.
So
I was afraid every time I went to sleep that
you weren't going to wake up.
Yeah, because I would stop breathing again, right?
Yeah.
So I was afraid for the first couple months to even lay down.
Yeah.
Well,
I can imagine.
So
now are you like, what kind of diet? And you said you're back on your supplements, and are you able to move around and walk and do the things?
Absolutely. So I went on that antidepressant for a year, and it did help. It helped me because time mattered, because they had scared me so much. It was like any moment I'm going to die, right?
Yeah.
So if I do this, I'm going to die. If I do this, I'm not, so, but after a year I could come off of it. So that was good. So I didn't have to stay on it. I was stable. And then I think it was once we started the pandemic, actually. I tried it before. I got to the doctor's appointment before, but I couldn't get to see this doctor until August in 2020. And I knew I needed to lose weight. I knew that my heart stuff wasn't doing this great. And I'm like, okay, you can't take medicine. You can't do all this other, you're doing everything else you can. What is something you can do? And I definitely needed to lose weight. I was like, well, that's something you have control over, right? You don't have control over anything else. So let's go do it. And I knew for me years ago that a low carb lifestyle had been, and because of the history of diabetes and stuff in my family, with my older family, I went to a doctor specifically who does the keto diet, low carb keto diet. And he is a doctor at Duke. So he was a well-known doctor. It's not, right? And so I was fortunate enough to get into his program. And once I did that and really got rid of all the carbohydrates and stopped worrying about all the other things the doctors had told me and they were still trying to tell me, don't go on fad diets, don't do. I'm like, okay, whatever. And I did it anyway. And I've lost over those years since then. I've lost 50 pounds. I'm still going. I still have a little bit more that I want to do. But more importantly, what happened was my overall health so greatly increased.
Yeah.
So I could get back on. I have a stationary bike. I could get back on that bike.
Awesome.
I did it this morning. Basically, I see how far I can get in 30 minutes. Like, okay, usually it's 4 miles. Today it's 3.9, but generally. So the doctor's like, wait, you couldn't even walk in here, right? And so part of that is with supplements, and it was listening to my body. Right? It was basically like my body telling me, I don't want this. And I kind of compare it to, I had a cat who had an illness, and I went to the vet, and she gave me 2 things for him, and one of them was for thyroid, and understandably, and so we took that, and he really didn't mind. I mean, it was, he had to every morning he had to get his thyroid med, But he did it. The other thing was this other thing, because he had some kind of something in his belly, and they were like, oh, this is going to help reduce that, whatever. And he absolutely refused it. I mean,
hated it.
He balked at that one. The other one he didn't have a problem with. And after fighting with him, because he was such a good, sweet, sweet cat, but he fought like crazy. I went, okay, what is this? Let's tune into yourself. What's going on? I'm like, well, one, he doesn't want it, and it's a pain in the neck. But what if, animals, and isn't it interesting? We always give animals sometimes more credit than we give ourselves.
I know.
I'm like, he knows it not going to help, so he doesn't want it.
He doesn't want it.
He took the one that helped, but he did
They're
not.
Smart.
He refused to take that one. And so I was like, well, he knows I'm going to honor it.
Yeah.
Right? And isn't it interesting how we're so willing to honor, the animals know.
Yeah, but we let our bodies just forget about it.
But we're like, oh, these other people know so much. Well, maybe it doesn't. Maybe our body does know. And my body was, I'm not saying that those medications don't work for people, because obviously they do.
Right.
But in my case, they did not. And it was just, I think the part that really irritated me the most is that I wasn't telling you that these are trash and these are horrible and nobody should ever take them.
Right.
I mean, I was in pharma. I do believe in them. But I was really upset that they never gave the option that perhaps it doesn't work for you.
Right. That is frustrating that you had to prove yourself. Yeah.
Right. The answer, and they do this a lot with women, especially, the answer is, oh, you'll just it'll pass. Just stay with it.
Yeah, stay with it. Yeah, keep going.
And I see so many other women in groups that I'm in or whatever, where they're having some debilitating stuff and they just put up with it because the doctor says to take the medicine.
Take it.
And then I watch them get sicker and sicker. They may some of these drugs give them, so they had heart failure, now they have diabetes too. Good. Yay.
And let's give them another drug.
And they're putting on weight like crazy, which definitely,
so let's give them weight loss drugs.
All this stuff, and all that stuff the doctors kept going, oh, there's a new drug, and I'm like, nope.
So, well, let's try this.
So to bring that all kind of full circle, I now am at a place in my life, weight wise, that I certainly haven't been in the last 25 years.
Yeah.
Probably longer, actually.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
That's good. Yeah.
This last time I visited my cardiologist last fall, he was like, well, we don't need to see each other every 6 months anymore.
Awesome.
I went from, my husband had to drop me off, and he dropped me at the door to the hospital, and I had to get in a wheelchair, and we had to be wheeled all the way to it for like the first year. To now I drive myself there, walk the whole, quarter of a mile, half a mile.
Back in there.
No problem, etc. So the doctor said to me that at this time he was, I can never remember what you would say. I guess it would be upgrading, because upgrading would be positive here.
Right.
So he was changing my heart failure diagnosis from 2B to 1.
Wow.
Which means it doesn't have any limitations on my daily life. And it really doesn't. Honestly,
that's great.
Other than I was like, oh, maybe I should be careful about something, whatever.
It comes in your head like, I wonder if I'm okay to do that.
Yep, exactly. And now, it's not.
You're able to do. Yeah.
And so I think that's pretty cool. And not only am I able to do it from his perspective, I think the other part of it is it doesn't cross my mind. So remember when I first started, it was like, oh my God, I'm going to die any minute.
You're a panic.
Antidepressant.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm afraid to lay down. Oh my gosh, is this? Oh, my legs are starting to cramp again. Oh no, is that going to be, am I going to be someplace and then just fall down because I can't even walk?
Right.
Any of those things, to kind of going, I didn't even think about it. It doesn't occur to me.
Now you live. You get to live.
Yeah. Exactly.
And not be panicked.
So there's part of me that's thinking, well, maybe I will. If we get a chance, I'll get back on that 15-hour flight to Hong Kong or something.
Oh.
It's like there was a time where I was just, honest to God, they had me afraid to get in the air at all.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
And so there has been some short air flight, and I'm like, okay, let me just check. I'm just a little concerned. To the point now, really, I'm just kind of like,
maybe I should do it. Yeah. And live. Yeah. Because the restrictions are off. So enjoy life. Now, are you off your thyroid medicine as well, or?
No, the thyroid
You
medicine
stay on
I
that?
did come back on, although much lower dose.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's probably, I don't know 100%, but I would say that between the stress and the hormonal fluctuations, that my thyroid meds were too high.
Yeah.
And, that's another one of those things where when you go on them, when you go on thyroid meds, they pretty much tell you, one, oh, these are the safest meds you'll be on, which I guess kind of. Compared to some things, that is true. And two, once you're on thyroid med, you'll always have to be on them. You'll never be able to be off of them, right? And so you'll never go back. Like, so whatever dose you have, you'll always be at least that, but you'll probably go more as time goes by, right? And so I had been on a steady state for many years, and I didn't think anything of it. But what happened once I was out of that stressful environment, remember I talked about things compensating, right? So the adrenals were stressed all the time. So the thyroid was like, here, give me more.
Overdrive.
Right? I need more to help you balance, right? When I didn't need all those, and then I was also doing some hormonal stuff, it was like, okay, wait, we don't need all this. This is way too much. But I wasn't getting tested very regularly because I've been that way for so long.
Yeah,
right?
you just did.
We were in maintenance mode. And so I really have a feeling that that's part of what did it. And so for the first couple of years, I wasn't on any thyroid meds. I watched it carefully because I didn't want it to spike my blood pressure, which is what it would do, right? I would take some of my blood pressure. I was like, okay, I need to keep the blood pressure down. And then after a while, I finally got better, and I was like, okay, we'll start. And so we start with very small doses. So I'm on a small dose now.
I was on thyroid meds for 7 or 8 years because I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, and then I was on all that regimen cocktail. And then my thyroid was off. And after I got married 27 years ago, I had changed doctors. And so I went to my new doctor and I was like, I want to check this thyroid thing, see where I'm at. He said, well, you're not that bad off. So he adjusted my thyroid. It sent me into, I don't know what. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't do anything. I said, look, just take me off. Let's see what I do. I can't deal like that. And so I came off of it, and I haven't been back on it. I keep a regular check on it. It was like a tenth up a little bit a couple of years ago, and I get a call, your prescription's ready. And I'm like, what? I was like, no, I will figure this out in a natural way. I'm not going back on thyroid because, it stops your thyroid from working, the medication. So if you stay on long enough, your thyroid's not going to work. So my mother had hers removed. I know it's in the family. So I have just done everything I can naturally to keep it functioning. Came off all the protocol for fibromyalgia. I was like, this stuff is keeping me so like you just all the time. The pain can be there, but I'm going to deal with this. So I got on good supplementation, and now I don't have to live in that illness. I think a lot of times too, people become the illness. They just live in it because they don't know any other thing, and they're not smart enough, or no, I shouldn't say that. That's kind of rude, but not willing enough to look into what might be causing it, like the medication. Because the doctor said, I need to keep taking this. I need to take this. And he adds one more thing because while you go in with another feeling, today I have headaches all the time. Okay, let's give you this. And the next time I'm holding water. Okay, let's give you this. So before long, you have this bucket load of medications. You don't know what's wrong with you anymore. You're at the point of, I just hate seeing people feel like that when there could be change. There could be.
Yeah. And so there's two things there. One, what happens for some people is they get sick enough and they just identify with that illness.
Their illness,
And I have to catch myself sometimes. I mean, I only ever say I have heart failure if there's
just have to,
there's a good reason for it. But there are people, but there are people like, oh, I can't, and they just so become that it's like coming out the other side of that is just impossible. The other thing is, and I don't know, maybe it's because I worked in pharma, maybe not. I certainly have a great respect for doctors.
Oh, definitely.
But they are not the be all and end all of everything.
Right.
At the and I have had early on doctors that I just adored who would say to me, you know your body best.
Yeah.
Like, I know
Yeah.
these things, but you know how you react
You
to this.
know how you feel.
So there were times when I would come in and say, this is something, and they'd be like, well, that's what you say. Let's test it.
Let's
I mean,
be done.
I'd come in and I'd say, I have strep throat. And they're like, no, you don't. I'm like, well, we can do the test, but you clearly don't have strep. I'm like, I'm telling you. And because I was getting a sore throat, I'm like, I know what this is. This is weird. And they're like, they did the test and the person came back 15 minutes. They're like, you have strep throat. I'm like, I tried to
I
tell
told
you
you.
that. Right,
Yeah.
exactly. But they
Yeah.
weren't listening.
Yeah.
So one, it's that it's almost in some respect putting too much, like that doctors know absolutely everything.
Right.
And
right.
if we
And they're
look,
not educated on every single medication
no,
that comes in that office.
no, and they don't, and they're not necessarily, they get a very small thing on nutrition. So that's not to help you with kind of supplements and think about, and I think part of it is this thing of Americans do this, so that's why we're stuck this way. Like, just give me a pill, we don't want to do anything.
Yeah, fix it.
But how often do they actually talk to you about your lifestyle? Now, to be fair, so you look at me, when I started with heart failure, I was definitely obese. Okay. So you look at me and you say, so they want me to go on a DASH diet, which is the low sodium, whatever.
Yeah, I remember that.
Not lose weight diet.
No,
because that would help your heart. Right. Not, it's like, so no, I mean, and I don't know, like, oh, they don't want to put me down. I was like, but really, it's like, well, here's something you can do yourself. How about if you lose some weight? Now, maybe I would have listened. Maybe I would. The point is that you don't often hear that. So when I came back and said, this is my solution instead of the drug that you gave me, let's see if me losing the weight, and guess my blood pressure's down. Everything's down.
Everything leveled back out. Yes. Yeah. We're stressing our body with the weight. I mean,
right. So I ate the foods that were nutritious for me. Everybody has slightly different according to your body type and whatever. That's what worked for me. I take supplements that help the things deficiency I have in my body, that clearly my body at some point stopped making some of these things or needs those things more because it's injured or whatever.
Yeah.
So you do all those things, like, do the walking, do the living, do the joy, do the laughter and all that stuff.
Yes.
That's what's going to help you as much as the medicine.
Or either choose to sit on that couch and not have life.
And that's fine too. If that's
really what somebody wants to do.
Yep. If that's what you want. But, I was just like, yeah, no, this is,
it's got to change.
And people have said to me, so, you're a scientist, you came from pharma. Do you not believe in drugs? And it's kind of like, no, I am not anti-medicine.
Right. Right.
And what's really interesting is what I have seen through my own journey, right? Really close up, because now first I made them, now I had to go through all it using them. It was that in the West, we are really, really good at emergency medicine. Anything that's an emergency, we are so good, whether it's with medicine, whether it's with surgery, with whatever. We're so good in, I mean, that is a strong strength that we have in that area. But when it comes to anything chronic, all we do is throw a pill at it. And that's not actually helping the situation, it's just masking whatever it is.
Right. And that's with my husband. He was put in August with heart failure and colon cancer, all in the same. 2 diagnoses. Well, you can imagine the list of medications that they had him on in the hospital. He came home. He said, I'm not taking any of that. I said, okay. I didn't know all what he should probably really have. I was scared too. Like, okay, he's just going to die because he's not taking something that he should probably take. But his blood pressure was finally leveling out. And if he had taken all those blood pressure medicines, his blood pressure would have stayed so bottomed out. And then the cancer cocktail is still the same that it was 15 years ago. He didn't want to go through that again because he had had cancer before. And so he's letting his body do its thing. He's living. He's living. Right. How long that is, we don't know, but he has the cancer and he is supposed to have open heart surgery. He's not going to be able to do that now that his body has the cancer like it does, but he's living and he's not taking the medications. And the doctors were so angry. They were like, but you need these. And he said, I'm not going to take them. So they wrote big words on his chart, refuses to take meds. Yep. And I'm like, that's his choice. I mean, you do have a choice.
I was labeled a difficult patient.
Yeah, that's why he had that label in the hospital.
And it was only because I asked, what
you were adamant.
What does this drug do?
Yeah.
Well, it does it. Oh, really? How does it work? And what's really
And they
funny,
couldn't tell you.
they couldn't tell me, but you know what the best part was? I was on the program for that drug.
Oh
My
gosh.
company made that drug.
Oh my
So
goodness.
I know, so that's why when they were
You
telling
knew
me
more than a doctor.
when they told
Mm-hmm.
me it was doing this, I was like, really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, how does that work? Because I was
Right.
like, well, maybe they discovered something since
Something new. Yeah.
right? Maybe, yeah, I'm open to listen. And they couldn't. I'm like, that's not how it works.
Mm.
So, and all those spasms I was have those kind of seizing kind of
Mm-hmm.
moments.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine this is kind of like what your husband has in some respect. I was told after just being told I had heart failure, I was then told that I either have multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's,
Oh.
most likely multiple sclerosis.
Mm.
So within months of each other, it's like you have heart failure and now you have multiple sclerosis.
Mm.
So the easiest answer was not, oh, maybe the drugs are causing a problem.
No,
The
let's just give you
easiest
another
answer
drug.
was you have multiple sclerosis.
Right. Give you a
So
diagnosis.
I had to go through a pretty invasive thing for me, which was a head MRI. And I remember I'm supremely
Don't
claustrophobic.
like.
So it was everything I could do to get through there to prove that I didn't have MS. I mean, I was
You
going through
knew.
these, I was going through all these tests to prove that I didn't have the things that they said I did, that it was the medicine. I was just like, why should I have to go through all these invasive tests to prove I
Exactly.
know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. I think that's what we have to leave
Anyway,
this
it's
today is
interesting.
about
Yeah.
being the biggest fighter for yourself and
Yes,
not being
absolutely.
afraid to say what you feel and know inside about what's going on in your body. And if they're not going to listen, go to somebody else.
Yes,
You find the
absolutely.
person that's going to listen. I mean, you don't have
Absolutely.
to stay with that doctor. You know, if somebody had been
Exactly.
so
Exactly.
loyal and yes, you like him, but something's off. You need to find what it is. So, Deanna, I appreciate you today. And I love to ask my guests, what is something that you like to collect? Or if you are a collector.
Well, probably one of the biggest things I collect that my husband would say is crystals.
You probably have multitudes of them, right?
I have a bunch of them right next to me. Yeah, I have a lot of them. And it's always like, oh, I don't have that one. And he's like, oh,
you gotta
Lord,
get,
here we go. Yep.
You gotta have another one, right?
Yep. Yep.
Oh, that's cool. And also, I have a deck of cards that are with scripture, and I sit and shuffle them while we were talking. And I love to read whatever is on top. And so the scripture that came up is the Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. Exodus 15:2. And so I like to end with that. I just, I love to share those because you never know what's going to be on top. And it's something that I know that he's saying to us today. So, Deanna, it's
I'm
been
getting
a pleasure.
goosebumps from it.
I know,
Actually.
I always do. I always do because that's him speaking to us today.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you coming on today and being my guest. I will put your information in the show notes about how anybody can reach out to you and learn more from you. But again, just thank you.
You are so welcome. It's been a pleasure today, Laura.
Thank you for joining my podcast today. We all have a story to share. Each story has purpose and makes an impact to you, the listener, creating a journey with passion and purpose. The journey we're taking is the journey within you. Please share with others and subscribe below.